The slap landed like a crack of thunder across the entire restaurant. Every fork stopped mid-air. Every conversation died. Every single person in Aurelio's, the most exclusive dining establishment in downtown Chicago, where reservations were booked 6 months in advance and the waitstaff wore earpieces, turned toward table 7. Oliver Shaw stood completely still for exactly 2 seconds after the impact. His left cheek burned. The woman who had just struck him, late 40s, sharp blazer, diamond earrings the size of cherry pits, stood with her hand still raised, chin lifted, like she was daring him to do something about it. "You think you can publish that article about my son?" she hissed, low and venomous. "You think you can drag the Hartfield name through the mud and walk around this city like nothing happened? You are nobody, boy. You are a leash around a powerful man's wrist, and nothing more." Oliver's jaw tightened. Not from the sting of the slap, but from the weight of what she had just called him. A leash. He had heard worse, technically. He had covered 3 organized crime trials, 2 federal investigations, and a city council scandal so deep it had made national headlines. He knew how people talked about Omegas who ended up with men like Magnus Pierce. He had developed a very specific kind of armor for those words. But something about the public nature of this, the way the entire restaurant was watching, the way the waitstaff had gone absolutely rigid, the way even the sommelier had stopped mid-pour, made the armor feel thinner tonight. Oliver lowered the linen napkin he'd been holding, placed it on the table, straightened his collar, and then, from across the restaurant, from the private dining area separated by a frosted glass partition, a partition that had apparently not been as soundproof as the management of Aurelio's believed, came a voice. Low, controlled, edged with something that made the ambient temperature of the room feel like it dropped 3 degrees. "Bring her to me." That was all Magnus Pierce said. 3 words. And somehow, those 3 words did more damage to the atmosphere of that restaurant than the slap had. Decker Price was the one who moved first. He had been sitting with Magnus in the private dining room, going over acquisition details for a warehouse district property the syndicate had been eyeing for months. They had been mid-sentence, Decker mid-sentence to be precise, because Magnus had stopped talking approximately 30 seconds before the slap, the moment the woman had raised her voice 2 tables away, his attention shifting in that particular way it always did when Oliver was somewhere in the vicinity and something felt wrong. Magnus had always been like that, hyper-attuned to Oliver in a way that no one in the syndicate discussed openly but everyone had noticed. It was one of those things about the boss that people filed away under do not comment on and moved forward with their lives. Decker stood, straightened his jacket, and walked through the frosted glass door into the main dining area with the practiced ease of a man who had defused considerably more volatile situations than this one. Troy Banks materialized from somewhere near the entrance. Nobody ever quite saw Troy move. He simply appeared where he was needed, and fell into step 2 paces behind. The woman, Decker identified her in less than 4 seconds. Sandra Hartfield, widow of the late city councilman Richard Hartfield, mother of Brandon Hartfield, currently the subject of a federal money laundering investigation that Oliver Shaw had broken wide open in the Tribune 3 days ago, turned at their approach. She seemed to realize, approximately 1 moment too late, that she had made a significant miscalculation. "Mrs. Hartfield," Decker said pleasantly, "Mr. Pierce would like a word." "I don't," she started. "That wasn't a question," Troy said from behind Decker. His voice was the kind of quiet that only very large, very capable people could produce. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume to fill a room. Sandra Hartfield's chin stayed up. Her composure was impressive, Decker noted clinically. Most people crumbled faster. Oliver, still standing at his table, touched his cheek once. A quick, almost absent gesture, and then looked at Decker with an expression that Decker had learned, over 4 years of working alongside Magnus Pierce, to translate as, "Please do not make this worse." Decker gave him a small nod, a reassurance. Then he turned back to Sandra Hartfield and gestured, very politely, toward the frosted glass door. The private dining room of Aurelio's was not a large space. It held 1 table, 6 chairs, a sideboard with a very good bottle of Burgundy that was currently half empty, and Magnus Pierce. Magnus was seated when Sandra Hartfield entered, which was a deliberate choice. Decker knew it. Troy knew it. Magnus standing would have been a statement. Magnus seated was something else entirely. It was the posture of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to end and saw no reason to perform urgency about it. He looked at Sandra Hartfield the way a geologist might look at an interesting but ultimately unremarkable rock formation. "Sit down," he said. She sat, which surprised her, Decker thought, watching her face. She had probably planned not to. "You struck my omega," Magnus said. Still that same low register. Still completely controlled. In a public space. In front of 47 witnesses, 6 of whom have already taken out their phones. Sandra opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," Magnus said. Not loudly. He never said anything loudly. But the sentence closed like a door. Sandra's mouth closed. "Oliver Shaw is a journalist," Magnus continued, leaning back slightly in his chair, one hand resting on the table with that silver ring catching the light. "He published a factual, documented, legally reviewed article about your son's financial activities. That article has already been picked up by 4 national outlets. Striking Oliver in a restaurant does not unpublish the article. It does not uninvestigate your son. What it does," Magnus paused, and the pause was the kind that made people hold their breathing, "is give Oliver an additional story." The room was very quiet. "I suggest," Magnus said, "that you think very carefully about your next words to me, because they are the last words you will say in this room, and they will determine whether you leave here with your reputation intact or with a lawsuit that takes 4 years and every cent you have left to resolve." Sandra Hartfield left the private dining room 7 minutes later. She walked through the main restaurant with her chin still up, credit where it was due, but her face had gone a shade that Decker privately catalogued as comprehensively outmaneuvered. She did not look at Oliver as she passed his table. She collected her coat from the hostess stand, and she left. The restaurant exhaled. Oliver was still at his table when Decker returned to him. His water glass was full, he hadn't touched it. His thumb was tapping his knee in that steady, rhythmic way that meant he was working very hard to appear calmer than he was. "You okay?" Decker asked, pulling out the chair across from him. "I had it handled," Oliver said. "I know you did. I was about to say something very measured and devastating. I'm sure it would have been excellent." Oliver looked at him. "Is he?" "He's asking for you," Decker said. Oliver's thumb stopped tapping. He pushed back his chair, stood, and walked toward the frosted glass door. Magnus was still seated when Oliver came in. He looked at Oliver's face, specifically at the cheek, where the mark of the slap was still faintly visible, a pinkish shape that Oliver would probably be able to photograph clearly within the hour if he wanted evidence. And something moved through Magnus' expression that was difficult to name precisely. It wasn't rage. Rage was hot and fast. This was colder, more structural, the way a foundation shifts. "Sit," Magnus said. "I'm fine," Oliver said. "I know you are." "Sit anyway." Oliver sat. Not because he was told to. Decker had observed over 4 years that Oliver Shaw did almost nothing simply because Magnus Pierce told him to, which was one of the more fascinating dynamics Decker had ever witnessed in this organization, but because he wanted to. Because he walked into rooms where Magnus was and relaxed 3 degrees, the way a person relaxes when they've finally reached somewhere warm after a long time in the cold. Magnus reached across the table. He pressed 2 fingers very lightly to Oliver's cheek. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "It's a slap, Magnus. I've had worse." That wasn't the question. Oliver exhaled through his nose. "A little," he admitted. "More the public part than the physical part." Magnus nodded once. His fingers moved away. He picked up his water glass, set it down again. "She won't touch you again," he said. "I know." Oliver looked at him steadily. "But I want you to understand something." Magnus waited. "I am going to keep writing," Oliver said. "About Brandon Hartfield, about the councilman's estate, about all of it. Whatever she does. Whatever anyone does." "I know that too," Magnus said. "And I don't want you to—" Oliver paused, picking his words. "I don't want you to be the reason people stop going after me. I don't want the story to be Magnus Pierce protects his Omega. I want the story to be the story." Magnus looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "The story is the story. What happened tonight was separate. Was it? She put her hands on you, Magnus said. And there it was again, that cold structural shift in his tone. That has nothing to do with journalism. That is not a press freedom issue. That is a person who struck you, and I handled it. Gently, I hope. Adequately, Magnus said. Oliver looked at him. What did you say to her? I pointed out her legal exposure. And, pause. I may have implied that her son's federal case was about to become significantly more complicated. Oliver stared. Magnus. I didn't threaten her, Magnus said, with the mild precision of a man who understood the difference between a threat and a promise very clearly and had calibrated his words accordingly. I simply reminded her of the resources available to people who are motivated. That is, Oliver stopped. That is exactly the line I have to pretend I don't see when I'm writing about you. I know, Magnus said. You write it anyway. That's why I trust you. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, thank you. For earlier. Magnus inclined his head. Just slightly, the way mountains incline. Don't thank me, he said. Eat your dinner. Oliver almost smiled. Almost. You didn't even know what I was having. The salmon, Magnus said. You always order the salmon when you're stressed. It's the one thing you don't have to make decisions about. Oliver went very still for a moment. Then he did smile, small, a little reluctant, the way his smiles usually started before they opened up into something warmer. You are, he started. I know, Magnus said. Insufferable, Oliver finished. I know that too, Magnus said. They did not go home together that night. This was one of the things about Magnus Pierce and Oliver Shaw that nobody in the syndicate talked about and everyone quietly understood. They were mates, bonded and acknowledged, and they loved each other in the way that people who have both been alone for a very long time love each other. Fiercely, carefully, with an awareness of how rare it is. But they also had separate apartments. They spent 4 nights a week together on average, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on Oliver's deadlines and Magnus' business. It was Oliver's arrangement originally. He had been very clear, when things between them became serious, that he needed his own space to work. That he could not be Magnus Pierce's Omega in the social sense, the domestic sense, the kept sense, and also be Oliver Shaw the journalist. Magnus had understood this without requiring an explanation, which had been, Oliver reflected as he sat in the back of the car Decker had arranged for him, one of the first signs that Magnus Pierce was different from what he appeared to be. The car moved through Chicago's nighttime streets. The glow of restaurants and storefronts slid past the window. Oliver held his phone, scrolling through the notifications that had piled up since the Tribune article dropped. Emails from other journalists, a comment thread that had 1,800 replies, a terse message from his editor that read good work. Also, are you okay? Also, I heard something happened at dinner, call me. And he found himself thinking about what Sandra Hartfield had called him. A leash. It wasn't a new word. It was the oldest criticism, that Omegas who ended up with men like Magnus were decorative, were restrained, were the thing that humanized a powerful man without being anything themselves. Oliver had spent 4 years proving that wrong, one article at a time. He had broken the councilman's story alone. He had developed the sources, run the documents, gotten the legal review, and published it without anyone's help. Magnus hadn't known about it until the morning it ran. Oliver had told him the night before, a professional courtesy, not a permission slip. Magnus had read it over his coffee and said, "Thorough. You buried the strongest line in paragraph 9. Which was true. Oliver had moved it to paragraph 3 in the web version. He stared at his phone now and typed a message to his editor. I'm fine. Dinner was eventful. The story stands. Let me know if the Hartfield team contacts you directly. Then he typed another message to a different contact. We need to talk. Tomorrow. There's something in the financial records I haven't published yet. He stared at that message for a long moment. Then he hit send. What Oliver Shaw did not know, sitting in the back of that car moving through the Chicago night, was that the message he had just sent had landed in the inbox of a man named Chester Rowan. Chester Rowan was 38 years old, a forensic accountant, and Oliver's most reliable source for the financial components of the Hartfield investigation. Chester Rowan was also, as of 6 weeks ago, on the payroll of someone who very much wanted the Hartfield investigation to stop. Chester Rowan read Oliver's message. He stared at it. Then he picked up a second phone, a burner, kept in his desk drawer under a folder labeled 2019 tax documents, and typed 3 words to a different contact. He knows more. The next morning arrived the way Chicago mornings usually did in early spring. Gray and determined, the kind of sky that hadn't decided yet between rain and restraint. Oliver's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Lincoln Park. A 2-bedroom unit he had rented for 3 years. The second bedroom converted entirely into an office. The walls of that office were covered in a system that his editor, the first time she'd seen it, had described as either genius or a cry for help. Printed documents, sticky notes in 4 colors, each color meaning something different. Strings of red yarn, yes, actual yarn, connecting related names and dates. Oliver stood in front of the wall at 6:47 in the morning, mug in hand, wearing the same clothes he had changed into the night before. Dark sweatpants and a gray long-sleeved shirt. His cheek had faded to almost nothing. He had excellent recovery physically. The other kind took longer. He was staring at a name he had written in the upper right corner of the board 3 days ago and then circled again, then drawn a question mark beside. Rowan Consulting LLC. It appeared in the Hartfield financial records as a vendor. A regular vendor, quarterly payments labeled as strategic advisory services, which was the kind of vague label that forensic accountants used when they were either very legitimate or very not. Oliver had sent the relevant records to Chester Rowan specifically because Chester was the best forensic reader he knew, and the Rowan consulting payments were the thread Oliver most wanted pulled. Now, looking at the board in the gray morning light, Oliver felt something he had learned, over years of investigative work, to take seriously. A feeling like a stitch in the wrong place. He set his mug on the desk, pulled up his laptop, searched for Chester Rowan's registration documents, the public filings for his accounting firm, available through the Illinois Secretary of State's business database. Took him 4 minutes to find it. Rowan Consulting LLC. Registered 18 months ago. Primary member, Chester A. Rowan. Oliver sat with that for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and, instead of calling Chester, called Felix Grant. Felix answered on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he had either stayed up all night at a gallery opening or something had already happened this morning that Oliver didn't know about. "Your face is all over social media," Felix said, without saying hello. "Someone at Aurelio's posted a video. It's blurry but the slap is very audible." Oliver closed his eyes for half a second. "Great. The comments are, look, 30% of them are supportive. 60% are arguing about whether Magnus Pierce is good or bad for Chicago. The remaining 10% are people who somehow made it about the restaurant's ambience." "Felix, right? What do you need?" "I need you to look someone up through your network. An accountant, Chester Rowan. I need to know who he's been seen with in the last 2 months. Gallery openings, fundraisers, charity dinners, anywhere your crowd intersects with the finance crowd." A pause. Felix's network was extraordinary for exactly this kind of thing. He moved through Chicago's cultural and philanthropic upper layers with the ease of someone who had grown up watching adults perform wealth, and he had the memory of an archivist. "Chester Rowan," Felix repeated. "Medium height, always overdresses for the venue. You know him?" "I know of him. He came to the March fundraiser for the Lakefront Arts Collective. He was with..." Felix stopped. "Felix." "He was with a man named Gregory Falk," Felix said carefully. "Which is interesting, Oliver, because Gregory Falk is Brandon Hartfield's personal attorney." The stitch in Oliver's chest pulled tighter. "Okay," Oliver said. "Don't tell anyone you told me that." "Obviously," Felix said. "Are you safe?" "Always," Oliver said. "That's a very confident answer for someone whose cheek is currently trending." "Goodbye, Felix." "Be careful," Felix said. And for once, there was nothing sarcastic about it. Magnus Pierce did not sleep in the mornings. He had not slept past 5:30 in 11 years. A habit developed during the years when he was building the syndicate from a mid-level operation into something that required a private dining room at Aurelio's and a legal team of 8 people. The early morning hours were when he thought most clearly, when the city was quiet and the variables were manageable. By 7 in the morning he had already run 6 miles, reviewed the overnight reports from Decker, approved 2 contracts, and eaten breakfast, actual breakfast, cooked by himself in the kitchen of the house on the North Shore that was home base for the syndicate's upper operations. He was reading through a property assessment when his phone lit up with a name. Oliver. He answered immediately, which was also something people in the syndicate had noted and filed under Do Not Comment on. "Good morning," Oliver said. His voice had that brisk, concentrated quality that meant his brain was already somewhere complicated. "Morning," Magnus said. "How's your cheek?" "Fine." "Magnus, I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "Chester Rowan, my source on the Hartfield financials, he may be compromised. He might be feeding information back to Brandon Hartfield's attorney." A pause. "You're telling me this before you've confirmed it," Magnus said. "I'm telling you this because if someone is tracking what I know, then what happened last night at Aurelio's might not have been Sandra Hartfield acting on impulse. She might have been there because she knew I was there. Someone told her." Another pause, longer this time. "You think you're being watched," Magnus said. "I think my source is being paid by the other side," Oliver said. "Which means everything I've told him, they know. And the one thing I haven't published yet, Oliver, is the strongest part of the story. It's the part that implicates 3 city officials directly. If they know I have it." "Oliver," Magnus said again, with a different quality this time. Firm. Focusing. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment." "Stay there."
"I'm sending Decker."
"Magnus, I do not need a babysitter." "I know you don't. I'm sending Decker because Decker is the best analytical mind I have, and you need someone to think through this with you who isn't Felix Grant." Oliver paused. "That's actually reasonable." "I'm frequently reasonable," Magnus said. "You just notice it less when you're in the middle of being stubborn." "I am not." Oliver stopped. "Fine. Send Decker. He'll be there in 20 minutes.
"Magnus."
"What?" "Last night. What you said about trusting me because I write it anyway." A pause, briefer than the others. "I've been thinking about that." "Don't think too hard," Magnus said. "Finish your investigation. Let Decker help you think through the source problem. And Oliver. Yeah. Be more careful than you think you need to be. That's all." Oliver exhaled. "Okay. Okay," Magnus said. He hung up and sat for a moment in his kitchen. The property assessment still open on the table, the morning light coming in flat and gray through the wide windows. Then he picked up a different phone and made a different call. "I need everything you have on Chester Rowan," he said when Decker answered. "Not for the investigation, for Oliver's protection." Decker, to his credit, simply said, "Give me 40 minutes." Decker Price arrived at Oliver's apartment with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a brown paper bag from a deli 2 blocks away. He had learned, early in his acquaintance with Oliver Shaw, that Oliver forgot to eat when he was deep in something, and a person who hadn't eaten was a person whose analytical capacity was running at reduced power. Oliver opened the door, took one look at the deli bag, and said, "I've eaten." "You haven't," Decker said pleasantly, and walked in. Oliver's apartment was exactly what Decker expected. Clean lines, minimal decor, and then the office, which was the controlled chaos of a very organized brain. Decker had seen the wall before. He had seen it in various stages, but the current iteration was denser than the last. "Walk me through what you have on Rowan," Decker said, setting up at the kitchen table. Oliver walked him through it. All of it, the Rowan Consulting LLC connection, the payment records, Felix's information about the Gregory Fox sighting, the timeline. He was methodical and precise in the way that good journalists were. He separated what he knew from what he suspected, and he was clear about which was which. Decker listened without interrupting. When Oliver was done, Decker opened his laptop and pulled up what he had assembled in the 40 minutes since Magnus' call. "Chester Rowan Incorporated Rowan Consulting LLC 18 months ago," Decker said. His primary clients in the first year were 3 small businesses, normal forensic accounting work. Then, 6 months ago, a new client appeared. The payment structure is offshore, which makes it harder to trace directly, but the routing goes through a shell registered in Delaware that I've seen before. He turned the laptop so Oliver could see the screen. It connects to a holding company that Gregory Falk controls. Oliver stared at the screen. He's been compromised for 6 months, Oliver said. At minimum. That means everything I've shared with him in the last 6 months has likely been passed to Falk. Yes. Oliver turned and looked at his wall. At the yarn. At the names. At the question mark next to Rowan Consulting LLC, which now felt less like a question and more like an answer he hadn't wanted yet. The piece I haven't published, Oliver said slowly. I hadn't shown it to Chester yet. I had the documents, but I was waiting to have him verify the accounting methodology before I ran it. So they don't know the specifics of what you have. But they know I'm still digging. And they know I'm getting close, because I told Chester I had something new. Oliver pressed his knuckles against the desk edge. I sent him a message last night. Decker absorbed this. What did the message say? That I wanted to talk. That there was something in the financial records I hadn't published yet. Decker was quiet for a moment. How quickly can you verify the accounting methodology without Chester? He asked. I'd need another forensic accountant. Someone clean. Someone who has zero connection to anyone in this case. Oliver tapped his thumb against his knee. I know one person, professor at Northwestern. He's done expert witness work for federal cases, completely independent. But getting him to look at this quickly. I can facilitate that, Decker said. Oliver looked at him. I have relationships at Northwestern, Decker said simply. That's not unusual. The syndicate funds 2 research fellowships there. I am choosing, Oliver said carefully, not to investigate that sentence. Wise, Decker said. What's his name? Oliver asked. Professor Alan Mercer. He chairs the Forensic Accounting Department. Can you reach him today? This morning, Decker said. What neither of them knew in that moment was that Chester Rowan had already done considerably more damage than sending one message to Gregory Falk. Chester Rowan, operating from his office on the 22nd floor of a building in the Loop, had spent the previous 3 hours compiling and transmitting everything he had received from Oliver Shaw over the course of 6 months. Financial documents, analysis notes, source references, the names of 3 city employees who had spoken to Oliver on background. 3 people who had trusted Oliver, whose names were now in Gregory Falk's hands. Chester had done this and then sat at his desk and stared at his monitor and felt something that was not quite guilt and not quite relief. It was the specific feeling of a person who has crossed a line and knows the line is now behind them. His desk phone rang. He answered it. It's done, he said. All of it? Said the voice on the other end. Everything he sent me. 6 months of material. A pause. Then, and the sources? The names? Chester closed his eyes. Yes. Good, said the voice. Stay available. This isn't over. Chester hung up. He opened his desk drawer, looked at the burner phone, looked at the folder labeled 2019 tax documents. Then he looked at the photograph on his desk. His nephew, 10 years old, at last summer's 4th of July, grinning with a sparkler in each hand. Chester Rowan closed the drawer. He sat very still. And then, slowly, he picked up his regular phone and dialed a number he had been trying very hard not to dial for 6 months. The number rang twice. FBI, Chicago Field Office, said the voice on the other end. Chester Rowan exhaled. My name is Chester Rowan, he said. I need to speak with someone in the Public Corruption Unit. I need to report something. A few things. It's going to take a while. Professor Alan Mercer was 61 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and had the specific energy of a man who had seen financial fraud in every creative form human beings had managed to invent and was permanently, mildly delighted by each new variation. He arrived at Oliver's apartment at 11:15 in the morning, having cleared his afternoon seminars with what Decker described simply as a scheduling adjustment. He carried a leather briefcase, shook Oliver's hand with both of his own, and looked at the wall in the office with an expression approaching reverence. You built this yourself? He asked. Over about 8 months, Oliver said. The yarn is a nice touch. I had a graduate student who used dry erase markers on his windows. His landlord was not enthusiastic. Mercer set his briefcase on Oliver's desk and opened it. What am I looking at? Oliver spread the documents. The originals, the ones he had kept entirely to himself, that had never passed through Chester Rowan's hands. The records he had obtained through a combination of a Freedom of Information request, a tip from a city building inspector who had since been transferred to a different department, and 6 weeks of very patient cross-referencing. Mercer put on his glasses and began to read. He did not speak for 12 minutes. Oliver and Decker sat at the kitchen table. Oliver drank water. Decker reviewed something on his own laptop. Outside, the gray sky had finally made its decision, and it was raining in that flat, persistent Chicago way. Said Mercer, from the office. Oliver looked up. Mercer said again, turning a page. Is that a good HM or a... It's an O. This is significantly worse than I expected HM, Mercer said. Which, depending on your purpose, may be a very good HM indeed. He came to the doorway of the office, holding 2 of the documents. He looked at Oliver over his glasses. These disbursement records, he said. You see how they're coded? Under Municipal Infrastructure Development. Yes, that's the line I couldn't fully interpret without someone who knows how city contract accounting works. What they've done, Mercer said, with the careful precision of a man about to say something consequential, is route approximately $4.3 million of public infrastructure funds through a series of private contractors, each of which exists on paper only, back into a holding account that, based on what you have here, sits 2 shell companies away from Brandon Hartfield's personal portfolio. The kitchen was very quiet. 4.3 million, Oliver said, over approximately 36 months. But here's the part that will matter most for your story. Mercer held up the second document. 3 of the contract authorizations bear the signature of Deputy Comptroller Neil Stafford. 2 bear the signature of Howard Greer, the Director of the Office of Budget Management. And 1, he paused. 1 bears the signature of Mayor Alan Whitmore's Chief of Staff, Davis Croft. Oliver stood up. You're certain, he said. I've been doing forensic accounting for 32 years, Mercer said calmly. I've testified in 41 federal trials. I'm certain. Decker looked up from his laptop. He and Oliver looked at each other across the kitchen table. This isn't just Hartfield, Oliver said. This goes significantly higher, Mercer confirmed. If I were the federal prosecutor on this case, which, based on what you've described, sounds like it may be developing, I would be looking at a RICO case involving at least 4 public officials and potentially the mayor's office. Oliver sat back down. His thumb was tapping his knee steadily, rhythmically. Oliver, Decker said quietly, this changes things. I know. The reason they want to stop you isn't just about the Hartfield family's money, Decker said. It's because this story takes down people who have been in place for years. That's an enormous amount of exposure for a very large number of people. I know, Oliver said again. And your source was compromised. They know you're close. I know. Oliver looked at the wall, at Davis Croft's name, which he had written there 3 weeks ago with a question mark. The question mark was answered now. They just don't know how close. Yet, Decker said. Magnus Pierce received Decker's message at 12:43 in the afternoon. He was in a meeting, a property negotiation that his legal team had been preparing for 3 weeks. But when Decker's name appeared with the flag they used for urgent matters, Magnus excused himself, stepped into the hallway, and read the message. Oliver's story is larger than anticipated. Involves mayor's office. His source was compromised and has transmitted 6 months of material to opposing counsel. Oliver has the key documents and a credential verifier, but he is now exposed. Recommend we discuss security protocols. Call when available. Magnus stood in the hallway of a downtown law firm for approximately 15 seconds. Then he called Decker. Where is Oliver right now? He asked. Still at his apartment. He's working on the draft. He's going to try to publish quickly, Magnus said. It wasn't a question. He already called his editor, Decker confirmed. He wants to run within 48 hours. Magnus turned slightly, looking out the hallway window at the rain-covered city below. The people who want this story stopped, he said. They know he has something. They know he's close. If the source has been reporting back for 6 months, they have people watching him. Almost certainly. Then the 48 hours between now and when he publishes is the window. Yes, Magnus thought for a moment. This was one of the things Decker had learned to appreciate about him. When something mattered, he didn't perform deliberation. He actually deliberated. The pause was real. Oliver is going to resist anything that looks like protection, Magnus said. He's already told me, twice, that he doesn't want a security detail. I know. Another pause. Set up a rotation. Plain clothes. I want 2 people on the building at all times, and I want someone on his editor as well. Don't tell Oliver. A beat. He's going to find out, Decker said. He is, Magnus agreed. And when he does, he will be angry with me. I can manage that. What I cannot manage is the alternative. Decker said nothing for a moment. Then, understood. And Decker, the FBI angle. Chester Rowan called the field office this morning. I assume that's going to accelerate things on the federal side. How did you know about Chester Rowan's call? I have a contact in the public corruption unit, Magnus said. A legitimate one. A man I went to law school with who went one direction and I went another. Decker absorbed this. Do you want me to? Not yet. Let the federal side move at its own pace. Oliver's story runs first. And if someone tries to stop it before then we have a different conversation, Magnus said. With the quiet finality that meant the conversation was over, he went back into the meeting. He sat at the table and listened to the property negotiation and participated with exactly the right amount of attention. And under the table, out of sight, his right hand was very still. Felix Grant arrived at Oliver's apartment at 2 in the afternoon, uninvited, carrying 2 containers of soup from the place around the corner, and the particular expression he wore when he was pretending he hadn't been worried. Oliver opened the door, saw the soup, saw the expression, and stepped aside without a word. Decker looks like a human spreadsheet, Felix said, setting the soup on the counter and looking at Decker, who was still at the kitchen table. Thank you, Decker said pleasantly. It was an observation. Felix turned to Oliver. You look like you haven't processed anything that happened in the last 18 hours. I've processed all of it, Oliver said. You've intellectualized all of it. That's different. Felix handed him a container of soup. Sit. Why does everyone keep telling me to sit today? Because you keep standing up when you shouldn't. Oliver sat. He accepted the soup. He looked at the container for a moment, then at Felix. This is going to be the biggest story I've ever published, he said. Felix nodded. And it's going to be complicated, Oliver continued. Because of who I am. Because of Magnus. People are going to say I had access because of him. That he fed me information. That the syndicate had a reason to take down city officials and I was the vehicle. Felix was quiet for a moment. Did he? Oliver looked at him steadily. No. You know he didn't. I know, Felix said. But do you have that on the record? Can you document every source? Every single one, Oliver said. And none of them connect to Magnus. Not one. I built this independently. Then that's the story, Felix said. You write it, you document it, you include a disclosure about your relationship with Magnus, and you let the work speak. The disclosure is going to create noise. Less noise than if you don't include it and someone surfaces it later. Felix tilted his head. Oliver, you know this. You know how to do this. The part that's got you stuck isn't the journalism. Oliver looked at his soup. What if it hurts him? He said quietly. The story. The noise around it. What if the connection to me becomes ammunition against him in some way I haven't anticipated? Felix was quiet for a long moment. You asked him the same thing 4 years ago, Felix said. When you first started covering the syndicate. You asked him if you being with him would be a problem for your work. And he said it was my choice to make, right? Because he respects your work. And because he knew, even then, that who you are and what you do are not separate things. Oliver looked up at him. He knew who he was falling for, Felix said simply. A journalist. An honest one. Someone who was going to find the truth and publish it regardless of who it was inconvenient for. Including him. You've written things that made his operations look complicated. More than once. And he's still here. Oliver was quiet. From the office, Professor Mercer called out, I've finished my preliminary write-up. Do you want to review it now? Or should I leave the notes? Leave the notes, please, Oliver called back. I'll review this evening. He turned back to Felix. It's not just Magnus I'm worried about, he said. I know, Felix said. It's the sources. The 3 people whose names Chester Rowan handed over. Oliver nodded. I've already tried to reach them, he said. 2 of them aren't answering. The 3rd one, he paused. The 3rd one answered, and he said he'd been contacted by someone he didn't know, told to stop talking to journalists. Threatened. Implied, Oliver said. It's always implied with these people. Troy Banks did not often work in the field anymore. At 35, Troy Banks managed the syndicate's entire security apparatus, which meant his job was coordination, protocol, and making decisions that other people executed. It was a desk job in a certain sense, though Troy Banks's desk had 3 monitors, a scrambled communication system, and a direct line to every security team the syndicate employed. But that afternoon, when Decker called to set up the rotation around Oliver's building, Troy Banks decided that he was doing the first shift himself. He was not entirely sure why. He was a practical man. He didn't overthink his instincts. He simply put on a gray jacket, took the elevator down to the parking level, and drove to Lincoln Park. He parked across the street from Oliver's building and settled in. At 3:14 in the afternoon, he noticed a car. A gray sedan, Illinois plates, no agency markings, parked 40 feet ahead of him, facing the same direction, engine off, 2 occupants who were not talking to each other. Watching the building. Troy observed the car for 9 minutes without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called Decker. We have company, he said. Gray sedan plates. He read them off. 2 men. They've been here at least as long as I have. Decker was typing before Troy finished speaking. Running the plates now. Any direction while we wait? Watch and wait, Decker said. Don't engage. And Troy, a pause. Don't let Magnus know yet. He's in a meeting, and if he knows, he'll come here himself. And that's a problem because Oliver is up there working, and the last thing he needs right now is Magnus Pierce standing in his lobby. Troy considered this. Fair point, he said. He settled deeper into his seat and watched the gray sedan. The rain continued. The city continued. And somewhere on the 14th floor, Oliver Shaw typed the opening line of the most important story of his career. He typed it, deleted it, typed it again. He had always struggled with opening lines. Not with the facts, not with the structure, not with the sourcing. Those were the muscles he had built over years of work, and they were strong. But the first sentence of a story like this one carried an enormous amount of weight. It had to be true, and it had to be clear, and it had to make a person who was reading it at 6 in the morning over their coffee understand immediately why this mattered. He tried. $4.3 million disappeared from the city of Chicago's infrastructure budget over 3 years, and a paper trail leads directly to the office of a sitting mayor's chief of staff. He read it back. He deleted it. He tried. For 3 years, while Chicago's roads went unfixed and its schools went underfunded, a network of shell companies was quietly redirecting public money into private hands. He read that back. He left it. He kept typing. Outside his window, the rain had begun to ease. The gray sky was softening toward the pale, washed-out blue that sometimes appeared in Chicago in the late afternoon after rain, fragile and temporary, like an apology. Oliver's phone lit up. A message from a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it. Stop writing. This is the only warning you'll get. Walk away from the story. Oliver stared at the message. His thumb was not tapping his knee. He was very still. Then he screenshotted the message, forwarded it to his editor with the note saving as documentation, and went back to his draft. He typed faster. The gray sedan was still there at 5 in the evening. Troy had memorized both men in it by now, The driver, heavy-set with close-cropped hair, who had stepped out once to use his phone and had done so facing away from the building. And the passenger, younger, who had not moved in 2 hours and whose stillness had the particular quality of professional training. Decker had run the plates. The car was registered to a company called Clearfield Consulting, which Decker cross-referenced in 12 minutes and determined was a private investigative firm with documented connections to Gregory Fawkes' law offices. "They're not here to do anything," Decker told Troy. "They're information gathering, tracking Oliver's movements, his visitors, his timeline." "They saw Mercer arrive," Troy said. "And Felix Grant. And me." Decker paused. "Which means Fawkes knows Oliver has support. That changes the calculus. Does it change it toward more aggressive action or less?" "Less probably in the short term. Too many witnesses. But once Oliver publishes, once it's out, they have nothing left to gain by sitting on information," Troy finished. "The pressure moves to other targets." "The sources," Decker confirmed. Troy was quiet for a moment, watching the sedan. "What about the FBI angle?" he asked. "Chester Rowan was in a meeting with 2 agents from the Public Corruption Unit for 3 hours this afternoon," Decker said. "I don't know what he told them, but given what we know he had access to, it was considerable. So the federal investigation accelerates." "Likely." Troy considered this. "Magnus is going to want to know all of this." "He is," Decker agreed. "His meeting ended an hour ago." "I know." A pause. "Decker." "He's already on his way," Decker said. "He figured it out. He called me 10 minutes ago from a car heading toward Lincoln Park." Troy exhaled. "Of course he did. I told him about the sedan." "He was not pleased." "What did he say?" "He said—" Decker stopped for a moment. "He said, if they're watching him, they've already decided he's a threat, which means they've already moved past the warning stage." Troy looked up at the building. "At the 14th floor. Has anyone told Oliver about the sedan?" "Not yet," Decker said. "He's going to be angry." "He's going to be very angry," Decker agreed. "But he's going to be angry and alive, which I consider an acceptable outcome." Magnus arrived at 5:27. He did not go into the building immediately. He parked a different car, the kind that did not stand out, and sat for a moment, looking at the gray sedan. He looked at it the way he had looked at Sandra Hartfield in Aurelio's private dining room, with the patient, complete attention of a man who was calculating something. Then he got out, crossed the street, and walked into Oliver's building. The lobby security recognized him. Oliver had added him to the building's approved visitor list 8 months into their relationship, which Magnus had understood to be a significant gesture. Oliver-sized, understated, and deliberate. He took the elevator to 14, walked down the hall, and knocked. 30 seconds passed. Oliver opened the door. He was in the same clothes as that morning, the dark sweatpants, the gray shirt, and his hair was disordered from running his hands through it, and his eyes had the bright, slightly exhausted quality of someone who had been working at high intensity for 9 hours. He looked at Magnus, then, past Magnus, down the hall, as though checking for something. "Where's Troy?" he asked. Magnus kept his expression level. "Downstairs." "And the 2 men in the gray sedan?" Oliver said. A pause. "You know about the sedan," Magnus said. "I saw them from my window at 3:15, Oliver said. "I recognized the surveillance posture. I've spent enough time watching people to know when someone is watching someone else. I ran the license plate myself." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." Magnus came in. The apartment felt different at this hour. The rain had cleared and the evening light was coming in at a low angle, illuminating the dust motes in the office, the stacked documents on the kitchen table, the laptop open to a document that was clearly in progress. Oliver shut the door and turned to face him. "How long has Troy been outside?" he asked. "Since early this afternoon," Magnus said. "And Decker set it up?" "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." Oliver looked at him. His expression was carefully composed, not angry exactly, not yet, but with the particular controlled quality of someone who was deciding what they felt. "You put security on me," Oliver said. "Without asking." "I did," Magnus said. "We have talked about this. Oliver said. About autonomy. About me not being. A leash around a powerful man's wrist, Magnus said quietly. Oliver went still. I heard what she said to you, Magnus said. Last night. I heard all of it. I know you did. And I want you to understand something. Magnus took one step closer. Those two words, my Omega, I said them last night because they are true. You are mine. Not in the way she meant. Not as a possession or a decoration or a softening element. But in the way that matters. The way that means when someone has a car outside your building, I am not able to sit in a meeting and think about property acquisitions. Oliver was quiet. I should have told you I was putting security here, Magnus said. You're right about that. I made a decision that involved you without telling you, and that was wrong. I'm telling you now. The evening light moved slightly as a cloud passed somewhere above the city. Oliver looked at him for a long moment. How many? He asked. 2 on rotation. Troy right now, then 2 others through the night. And my editor? Magnus met his eyes. 1 person, plain clothes, outside her building. Oliver exhaled through his nose.
Magnus.
She's part of the story now. The people in that sedan know she's part of it. She's going to be fine, Magnus said. Unless I'm wrong about the people behind this, and I'm not wrong. Oliver turned away from him toward the window. The city had shifted into its early evening version. The lights beginning to come on in the high-rise windows, the traffic settling into the different rhythm of the post-workday hours. My editor knows about the anonymous message? He asked. Decker told me about it, Magnus said. Yes. The FBI is involved now. Chester Rowan went to the field office today. I know. Oliver turned back to look at him. How do you know? I have a contact, Magnus said. Someone I trust. He can't share details of an active investigation, but he confirmed the meeting happened. Oliver studied him. The man from law school? Magnus looked at him. How do you know about that? Decker mentioned it. Accidentally, I think. He said a man you went to law school with and then stopped like he'd said too much. Oliver folded his arms.
Magnus.
You went to law school. For 2 years, Magnus said. I left. You have never mentioned that. It's not relevant to. It is actually very relevant to everything about how you operate, Oliver said, with a focused intensity that Magnus recognized as his journalist brain cataloging information. You argue like a lawyer. You negotiate like a lawyer. When you talked to Sandra Hartfield last night, Oliver, I want to know more about this. You want to know everything about everything, Magnus said. It's one of your defining qualities. Don't deflect. I'm not deflecting. I'm pointing out that we're in the middle of a more urgent conversation. Oliver uncrossed his arms. You're right. We are. He looked at the laptop. I'm publishing in 36 hours. My editor is running it through legal review tonight. The sourcing is airtight. And Chester Rowan? Whatever he tells the FBI corroborates the financial picture. He has the same documents from a different access point. Oliver paused. I'm including a disclosure. About you. About us. Magnus was quiet. The disclosure says that I am in a relationship with the head of the Pierce Syndicate, that no information in this story came from that relationship or from anyone connected to it, and that every source and document has been independently obtained and verified. Oliver looked at him steadily. I wanted you to know before it runs. Magnus looked back at him. I appreciate that, he said. It may create problems for you. It may, Magnus agreed. People will talk. People already talk.
Magnus.
Oliver took a step closer. It is going to say very clearly in print in the Tribune that I am your Omega. It's already known, Magnus said, saying it is different from it being known. Magnus met his eyes. Oliver, publish the disclosure. Publish the story. Don't make yourself smaller for my benefit. Oliver looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not the way things shifted in movies, but in the small, genuine way that things shifted between 2 people who had spent years learning each other's faces. Okay, Oliver said. Magnus nodded once. 36 hours, he said. What do you need from me in those 36 hours? Stay away from the story, Oliver said immediately. Don't contact anyone connected to it. Don't do anything that could be characterized as influence. Agreed. And, Oliver paused. The sedan. What are you going to do about the sedan? Nothing for now, Magnus said. They're watching. If they move to anything beyond watching, that changes. But right now, they're information gathering, and their information is about to become irrelevant when you publish. And if they do something before I publish, then we have a different conversation, Magnus said. And Troy stops being decorative. Oliver almost smiled at that. Almost. You should eat something, Magnus said. You've been working for 9 hours. I had soup. Felix's soup at 2 in the afternoon. That was 5 hours ago. Oliver looked at him. How do you know Felix brought soup? Because Felix always brings food when he's worried, and I know what Felix worried looks like, Magnus said simply. Eat something, Oliver. The story will still be there in an hour. They ate in Oliver's kitchen. It was a simple thing. Reheated soup that Oliver found in the back of the refrigerator, bread from the counter, water. But the simple thing was what it was. 2 people at a kitchen table, an hour of ordinary life in the middle of something complicated. Oliver told him about Mercer's analysis. All of it, Davis Croft, the mayor's office, the 4.3 million. Magnus listened without commenting, which was different from listening without reacting. Oliver could see the reactions, small and controlled, moving through his expression. When Oliver finished, Magnus said, "This is going to be significant. I know. The mayor has been in office for 6 years. His chief of staff has been there for 5. I know. People are going to push back hard. I know," Oliver said. "But the documents are real, the accounting is verified, and the methodology is airtight. They can push back all they want. The math doesn't lie." Magnus looked at him. "The math doesn't lie," he repeated. "It's something my first editor told me," Oliver said. "In local news, people lie constantly. But if you follow the money, actually follow it, the math eventually tells you what happened. You just have to be willing to go where it takes you. Even if it takes you somewhere uncomfortable. Especially then." Magnus was quiet for a moment. "Oliver," he said. "Yeah. I am," he stopped. Started again. "I am proud of what you've built. As a journalist. As a person who goes where it takes him." Oliver looked at him across the table. The evening had deepened around them. The kitchen light was warm and small. "You're trying to tell me something," Oliver said, "without saying it directly. Because you're constitutionally incapable of." "I love you," Magnus said. Oliver stopped. Magnus said it the way he said most things, without performance, without decoration. It landed in the quiet kitchen with the solid weight of something that had been true for a long time and had simply been waiting for the right moment to be said out loud. Oliver looked at him. For a man who made his living from words, he was very quiet for a long time. Then, "I know," he said. Magnus raised an eyebrow. "I've known for a while," Oliver said. "I was waiting for you to figure out how to say it." "How long?" Magnus asked. "About 2 years." Magnus looked at the table. "I see. You show it constantly," Oliver said. "The way you listen. The way you said my Omega last night and meant it the way you meant it. The way you sent Decker and set up a security rotation and then came here yourself and told me the truth about it instead of pretending it wasn't happening." He paused. "You've been saying it for years. You just hadn't said it." Magnus looked up at him. "I love you too," Oliver said. "For what it's worth." "It's worth a significant amount," Magnus said quietly. Oliver almost smiled. "I know." Outside, the city went on doing what cities did at this hour. The sedan was still there. Troy was still watching it. The FBI was probably reviewing Chester Rowan's testimony. Oliver's editor was probably running his draft through legal. The story was moving the way stories moved, and nothing was going to stop it now. Inside, in a small kitchen on the 14th floor, 2 people sat across from each other in the warm light and said the things they had been meaning to say. At 9:45 that evening, Oliver's phone rang. His editor. "Legal cleared it," she said without preamble. Completely clean. We're running it tomorrow at 6 a.m. Oliver exhaled. There's one thing I want to flag, she continued. The disclosure. About Pierce. It's good. It's exactly right. It's transparent. It's thorough. But I want you to be ready for what comes after. I'm ready, Oliver said. This story is going to be very big, Oliver. And the part that people lead with, at least at first, is going to be the OMEGAVERSE angle. Because people are predictable, Oliver said. I know. I've been prepared for that for 4 years. And Magnus? Is he prepared? Oliver looked across the kitchen, where Magnus was standing at the counter, reading something on his phone with that steady, closed attention he brought to everything. Yeah, Oliver said. He's prepared. Then we run at 6. We run at 6, Oliver confirmed. He hung up. Magnus looked at him. Tomorrow morning, Oliver said. 6 a.m.
Magnus nodded.
Get some rest, he said. You could. Oliver stopped.
Magnus waited.
You could stay, Oliver said. If you want. Magnus looked at him for a moment. Yes, he said. Simply. No performance. Just the word. Oliver nodded once. And whatever came next, the story, the fallout, the noise, the pushback, it was going to come in the morning. Tonight was theirs. 6 a.m. arrived the way consequential moments often do. Quietly, without ceremony, without any indication from the world that something was about to change. Oliver was already awake. He had been awake since 4:30, which was not unusual when something was about to publish. His brain had always run ahead of him on days like this, pulling him toward consciousness before his body was ready. He had lain in the early dark for a while, listening to Magnus even breathing beside him, thinking about opening lines and disclosure paragraphs and the photograph of Davis Croft that the Tribune's photo team had pulled from the city archives. At 5:50 he had gotten up quietly, gone to the kitchen and opened his laptop. At 5:58 he refreshed the Tribune's homepage. At 6 a.m. exactly, the story appeared. The headline read, Inside the Pipeline, How $4.3 million in Chicago infrastructure funds flowed to private accounts tied to the mayor's office. By Oliver Shaw. He stared at it. His byline, clean and plain, at the top of the most significant story he had ever published. He read the opening line, the one he had chosen, the one that had survived 12 attempts. For 3 years, while Chicago's roads went unfixed and its schools went underfunded, a network of shell companies was quietly redirecting public money into private hands. And felt something release in his chest. Not relief exactly. Something more structural than relief. The feeling of something that had been held in a particular tension for a very long time finally being allowed to simply exist. He heard footsteps behind him. Magnus, barefoot, in a dark t-shirt and sweatpants, came to stand beside him. He looked at the screen. He read the headline. He read the opening paragraph. Good lead, he said. Oliver laughed. A short, quiet sound, surprised out of him. Thank you. Paragraph 3 is strong. Magnus continued, reading. The quote from Mercer's analysis is well placed. The disclosure, he paused on the disclosure paragraph, is exactly right. Oliver looked up at him. You're already reading it like you're copy editing it, Oliver said. I'm reading it the way I read things, Magnus said. Thoroughly. He kept reading. Oliver watched him read. The way his eyes moved through the paragraphs, the small shifts in his expression at particular revelations, the moment he reached the section about Davis Croft's signature and his jaw tightened very slightly. This is going to be a significant morning, Magnus said when he had finished. I know. The mayor's office will put out a statement within the hour. I know. Fox firm will likely be fielding calls by 7. I know, Magnus. Magnus looked at him. You're very calm. I'm terrified, Oliver said. I'm just also very calm. Magnus looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Oliver had not seen him do before. He put his arm around Oliver's shoulders. Not a formal gesture. Not a protective one. But simply an arm around a person's shoulders the way people who love each other do when they're standing together at the beginning of something, and said nothing. Oliver leaned against him. Just slightly. The way a person leans when they have somewhere solid to lean. The calls started at 6:18. Oliver's editor first, then 3 other journalists who had been following the Hartfield case and had questions about methodology. Then a contact in the state attorney's office who said, with considerable brevity, "Good work, can we talk Monday?" Then 2 calls from numbers he didn't recognize that he let go to voicemail. At 6:45, a formal statement appeared on the mayor's office website denying any knowledge of the financial activity described in the article and announcing the appointment of an independent auditor to review the city's infrastructure contracts, which, Oliver noted with a specific professional satisfaction, was exactly the kind of response that confirmed you had found the right thread. At 7:10, Decker called. "The sedan is gone," he said. Oliver processed this. "When?" 6:03. 7 minutes after the story went live. They left without no unusual activity. Just left. When the story runs, they have nothing left to gain by watching, Oliver said. "That's what I thought too." "And the sources?" "The 3 whose names Chester gave to Falk. I had 2 people reach out to them this morning early before the story ran. They're aware that their identities may have been compromised. They've been advised about their options." Decker paused. "2 of them have already spoken to the FBI. The 3rd is considering it." Oliver exhaled. "They're protected?" "The FBI is motivated," Decker said. Chester Rowan's testimony was apparently extensive. Falk's firm is under federal scrutiny as of this morning. "Chester Rowan," Oliver said. "He made a different choice than the one he started with," Decker said. Oliver thought of the photograph in Chester's office that he had never seen, the one with the nephew, the sparklers, the summer light. He hadn't known about it. But he could imagine it the way good journalists imagined the specific human details that explained how people became who they were and then, sometimes, became someone else. "Tell Magnus the sedan is gone," Oliver said. "He already knows," Decker said. "He was watching from your window at 6:03. Oliver closed his eyes briefly. Of course he was. Felix Grant texted at 7:30. The message read, "It's everywhere." CNN picked it up. Washington Post is citing you. Also, someone made a meme about the Aurelio slap that is going very viral, and I cannot decide if that's good or bad. "You okay?" Oliver typed back. "I'm okay. Thank you for the soup yesterday." Felix replied, "I bring soup. That's what I do." Also, Mercer texted me to say working with Oliver Shaw was the most professionally satisfying experience he's had in a decade, and I feel like I should take some credit for connecting you. Oliver smiled at his phone. "You should," he typed back. "You really should." The professional fallout of the story moved quickly, the way these things did when the sourcing was airtight and the documentation was complete. By 9 a.m., the federal prosecutor's office had released a brief statement confirming an ongoing investigation into municipal finance irregularities. By 10, Neil Stafford had placed himself on administrative leave pending review. By noon, Davis Croft, the mayor's chief of staff, whose signature appeared on the critical contract authorization, had retained his own attorney, a detail that several news outlets led with in their afternoon updates. Brandon Hartfield's attorney Gregory Falk was not publicly available for comment. According to a brief report in one of the legal trade publications, his firm was undergoing an internal review. Oliver sat in the middle of it all in his apartment and did interviews. His phone was his tool of choice on days like this. He was better on the phone than on camera, more precise, and he knew it. He answered questions methodically, referring back to the article, pointing to the documentation, declining to speculate beyond what the reporting supported. He was professional and clear and thorough. At 2:15, his editor called again. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Functioning," Oliver said. "The Omega angle," she said. "The online conversation about the disclosure. I've seen it. It's about half and half. Half supportive, half." "I know what the other half is saying," Oliver said. She was quiet for a moment. "The work speaks," she said. "The work speaks," Oliver agreed. "You're going to get the call from the editor-in-chief," she said. "Today or tomorrow. This is Oliver, this is Pulitzer level." Oliver sat with that for a moment. "Let's not get ahead of it," he said. "I'm just telling you to be prepared." And she paused. "The thing you said yesterday, about wanting the story to be the story. It is. It really is. The disclosure is 2 paragraphs out of 8,000 words. People who actually read the piece are talking about Davis Croft and $4.3 million. The disclosure is a footnote. Good, Oliver said. You did good work, she said. Real work. The kind that matters. He thanked her and hung up. He sat for a long moment in the afternoon light of his apartment. The wall behind him still had its strings of yarn, its sticky notes, its connected names. He was going to have to dismantle it eventually now that the story was out, archive the documents, organize the files, close the chapter. But not today. Magnus came back at 3. He had been at the North Shore house for most of the day, fielding the professional reactions to the story from his own angle, which Oliver did not fully know and had deliberately not asked about, consistent with the line he maintained between their lives. Magnus had sent 2 messages throughout the day. One at 8 a.m. that simply said the lead is still good, and one at noon that said eat lunch. Oliver had, in fact, eaten lunch. Now Magnus sat across from him at the kitchen table, and the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light did in October in Chicago. Golden and slanted, the kind that made ordinary rooms look briefly extraordinary. How many interviews? Magnus asked. 11, Oliver said. I have 2 more tomorrow. The federal timeline? Moving faster than I expected. Chester Rowan's cooperation apparently gave them a significant amount to work with.
Magnus nodded.
And Falk, under internal review, which usually means he lawyers up, cooperates minimally, and hopes the larger fish draw the attention. He'll be disappointed, Magnus said. Probably, Oliver agreed. A pause. The good kind. The kind between 2 people who have run through the urgent things and arrived at something calmer. The disclosure, Magnus said. The online reaction. It's what I expected, Oliver said. I read some of it. I know. You have that specific expression when you've read something online that's irritated you. Magnus looked at him. I have an expression for that? You have an expression for everything, Oliver said. You just don't know that you do. Most people think you're unreadable. But not you. Never you, Oliver said. A silence that was not empty. The people saying that your work is compromised because of me, Magnus said. They're wrong. I know they're wrong. And the documentation proves they're wrong. I know. But it's still, Magnus stopped. Oliver looked at him. This was the thing about Magnus Pierce that most people never got to see. The full sentence rather than the controlled version. It's still what? Oliver asked. It still matters to me, Magnus said. That people see you clearly, that they see what you are, which is not an extension of me, which is not a footnote, which is, he stopped again, recalibrated. Magnus, Oliver said. You are the most capable person I know, Magnus said. And I include every person in my organization, including Decker, who is objectively exceptional. Oliver was very quiet. I am aware, Magnus continued, with the precision of a man choosing words carefully, that I am not an easy person to be with, that what I do and what I am creates complications. And I have never been certain. Another stop longer than the others. I have never been entirely certain that what I give you is proportionate to what you give up. Oliver looked at him across the table. What do you think I give up? He asked. Magnus met his eyes. Simplicity. A life where your work isn't tangled up with the question of who your partner is. That's true, Oliver said. And what do you think I get? Magnus was quiet. You, Oliver said. Which is... He paused, and his voice did something it didn't usually do, which was become less steady, and he let it because it was just the 2 of them and the afternoon light. Which is not a small thing, Magnus. It is not a small thing at all. Magnus was looking at him. I didn't get into this for simplicity, Oliver continued. I got into it for you. Specifically. The actual you who is complicated and precise and occasionally maddening and sends people to sit in cars outside my building without telling me and reads my opening lines like he's checking my work and says I love you after 2 years of showing it because saying it took him a little longer to get to. He exhaled. I got into this for that person. Magnus was still looking at him. He looked at Oliver the way he had looked at him in Aurelio's after the slap with 2 fingers pressed lightly to his cheek, with that particular quality of attention that was not possession and was not performance but was simply a man making sure someone he loved was all right. "Okay," Magnus said. "Okay," Oliver said. 3 weeks later, Chester Rowan appeared before a federal grand jury and provided testimony that ran to 412 pages. Davis Croft resigned from the mayor's office on a Tuesday morning. Neil Stafford was formally charged the following day. Brandon Hartfield's legal team entered preliminary cooperation discussions with the federal prosecutor's office on Wednesday. The mayor himself was not charged. The connection to his office was documented, but the direct authorization could not be traced past his chief of staff. But an independent audit of the city's infrastructure contracts was announced, court-ordered, and placed under the supervision of a federal monitor. Gregory Falk's law firm dissolved in the 5th week. Falk retained his own attorney. Oliver published 3 follow-up pieces in those weeks, each one building on the original, each one adding detail and context. His editor was right about the editor-in-chief's call. Oliver received it on a Wednesday afternoon, and afterward sat at his kitchen table for a long time, not doing anything in particular, just sitting with the fact of it. Then he called Felix. "I'm going to need you to not make a big deal about this," Oliver said. "Whatever you're about to tell me," Felix said, "I am absolutely going to make the appropriate amount of deal about it," Oliver told him. Felix made the appropriate amount of deal about it. Oliver smiled the whole time. The night the federal charges were formally announced, a Thursday, 6 weeks after the story ran, Oliver and Magnus were at the North Shore house. It was not a celebration exactly. Neither of them was the celebrating type, and the story was not, ultimately, a thing to celebrate. It was a reckoning which was different. A reckoning meant that something that had been wrong was being addressed, which was necessary and serious and carried with it all the weight of the harm that had been done before the addressing. But they sat on the back porch of the North Shore house, which looked out over the lake, and the lake in November was the color of pewter under a clear sky, and there were stars, faint and precise, appearing one at a time in the darkening evening. Decker had gone home. Troy had gone home. The house was quiet. Oliver had a mug of something warm, tea, which he only drank when he was actively winding down from something, and Magnus had nothing. He sat with his forearms on the porch railing, looking at the water. "Are you thinking about anything specific?" Oliver asked. "The lake," Magnus said. "You're lying." A pause. "I'm thinking about my father," Magnus said. Oliver waited. This was new territory. Magnus did not often speak about the origins of the syndicate, about what had preceded him, about the specific choices that had led a man who spent 2 years in law school to a certain kind of life. Oliver knew the outline. Everyone who had done enough research knew the outline. But the interior of it was different. "He built this from nothing," Magnus said, still looking at the lake. "Not admirable nothing, not garage startup, immigrant hustle, that kind of story. Ugly nothing. He built it through things I am not going to describe, and through people he hurt, and through a series of choices that I watched as a child and understood very early to be wrong." Oliver said nothing, just listened. "I stayed," Magnus said, "because walking away meant it continued without me, and with me it could change. Slowly, incrementally, I could make it less than it had been, more legitimate, more careful about harm." "And have you?" Oliver asked. Magnus was quiet for a long moment. "In some ways," he said. "Not in all of them. It is not a clean story." "No," Oliver agreed. "Your story," Magnus said, meaning the article, meaning all of it, "is about people in legitimate positions doing illegitimate things with public trust. My story is about someone in an illegitimate position trying to do fewer harmful things." He paused. "I don't know where that leaves me, ethically. I think," Oliver said carefully, "that people are rarely exactly one thing. And I think the question isn't whether your past is clean, no one's is entirely, but whether the direction is right." Magnus looked at him. "The direction," Magnus said. "Where you're heading," Oliver said. "Not where you've been." The lake was very still at this hour. The stars were coming in properly now, filling the sky above the water with their old, indifferent light. "You are the direction," Magnus said. Oliver looked at him. "I don't mean that as—" Magnus searched for the word. "I don't mean it as a weight on you. I mean it as a statement of fact. The reason the syndicate is different than it was 5 years ago is partly the choices I was already making and partly you. The fact of you. The fact that I know a person who follows the truth wherever it takes him and publishes it regardless of who it inconveniences. It has weight. In what direction? Oliver asked quietly. The right one, I think, Magnus said. Oliver looked at the lake. I'm going to keep writing about you, he said. When there's something to write. I'm going to keep being honest. I know, Magnus said. I'm counting on it. Oliver shifted his mug to one hand. With his free hand, he found Magnus on the railing. Not a dramatic gesture, just a hand finding a hand. The way hands do between people who have done this long enough that it's natural. Magnus turned his hand over. They sat like that, looking at the lake, as the November night deepened around them and the stars continued their indifferent, beautiful work above the water. Neither of them said anything for a while. It was enough. Oliver's follow-up series ran through the winter. The federal investigation expanded. 2 more officials were charged in January. By February, the independent audit had uncovered additional irregularities in 3 other city departments. Smaller in scale, but significant. Chester Rowan, having cooperated fully with federal investigators, received a reduced sentence for his role in transmitting Oliver's information to Falk. Oliver wrote about that too, briefly, factually, without personal commentary, though he thought about the photograph with the nephew and the sparklers and said nothing about it in print. Felix Grant was named to the board of the Lakefront Arts Collective in March, which had nothing to do with any of this but felt like a thing worth mentioning because it made Felix extremely happy and Oliver extremely proud, and some things are just good. Professor Alan Mercer's role as the verification expert for the story was cited by the federal prosecutor's office in their official case documents, which Mercer described as the most professionally satisfying footnote of his career and which Oliver suspected Mercer had framed and put on his wall. Decker Price remained Decker Price. Thorough, precise, reading people like spreadsheets, quietly indispensable. Troy Banks remained Troy Banks. Enormous, capable, appearing wherever he was needed without anyone quite seeing him move. And Oliver Shaw. Oliver Shaw's story ran in 5 national publications by syndication rights. His editor-in-chief's phone call led to a conversation about a larger project, which led to a book proposal, which was, at the time this story ends, in the early stages of negotiation. He still had the wall in his office. He had dismantled the Hartfield version and rebuilt it for a new story, a different story, one that had nothing to do with city officials or shell companies. His thumb still tapped his knee when he was working through something difficult. He still ordered salmon when he was stressed. He still called Felix when he needed someone to say the obvious thing out loud. He and Magnus still had separate apartments. They still spent 4 nights a week together on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. They had dinner at places that were not Aurelio's most of the time, because Aurelio's had become slightly more complicated since the night a woman slapped an Omega at table 7 and a voice from behind a frosted glass partition said 3 quiet, consequential words. On the rare occasions they did go back to Aurelio's, because the food was genuinely excellent and Oliver was not the kind of person to let a location be ruined by a bad memory. The staff greeted Magnus with the particular attentiveness of people who have recalibrated their understanding of someone, and greeted Oliver with the attentiveness of people who have read his byline and understand that the man in front of them is worth paying attention to in his own right. Which was exactly right. Which was exactly how it should be. Magnus said I love you more easily after that night in the kitchen. Not frequently, he was not a frequent person in general, but with a specificity that Oliver had come to recognize as more meaningful than frequency. He said it at particular moments. When Oliver published something difficult, when Oliver was exhausted from a long deadline, when they were on the back porch of the North Shore house watching the lake, when Oliver said something that made him laugh, which happened more often than Magnus had anticipated and more often than Oliver let on. Oliver always said it back. Not because he was required to. Not because it was the thing you said, but because it was true, and Oliver Shaw was constitutionally incapable of saying things that weren't. One evening in late spring, 6 months after the story ran, Oliver was at his wall again. The new wall, the new case, the new yarn. When Magnus came in and stood in the doorway and looked at it with the expression Oliver had come to understand as I find this alarming and impressive in equal measure. Is the purple yarn different from the red yarn? Magnus asked. Purple is financial. Red is personal connections. Green is government. Blue is. I didn't actually need the legend, Magnus said. You asked. I was making conversation. He looked at the wall for a moment more. How long? On this one, maybe 8 months until I have enough to run. And the people at the center of it? Complicated, Oliver said. Like people always are. Magnus looked at him. You'll follow it wherever it takes you, he said. Always, Oliver said.
Magnus nodded.
Then I'll be here, he said. Wherever it takes you. Oliver looked at him in the doorway. Silver ring on his left hand, expression steady, the man who ran a complicated organization and had 2 years of law school and a contact in the FBI and made decisions without telling people and then told them afterward and meant it when he said he was wrong to have done it and said I love you in kitchens at appropriate moments. Not simple. Not clean. Not a footnote. I know, Oliver said, and went back to his wall. The story of Magnus and Oliver proves one thing that no amount of power or fear can ever undo. When someone chooses to see you fully, not despite who you are, but because of it, that is the rarest force in the world. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that love and truth are not opposites. Subscribe to our channel, leave your thoughts below. See you next time.